Yoon.
This is a complete dramatized script, written in the style of high-engagement emotional storytelling channels. Each sentence is separated for optimal pacing and reading. They say, you should be your partner's number one priority.
For my girlfriend, I wasn't even in the top 5.
I spent 2 years fighting for a seat at her table, only to realize I was never actually invited. When I finally decided to walk away,
You die.
I didn't just pack a bag. I dismantled the entire life she thought she owned. My name is Owen, and I'm 27 years old. For the last 2 years,
Friend.
I was living in a relationship that felt more like a part-time job where I was constantly on call. My girlfriend, Natalie, was 25,
View.
and she lived her life according to a strict code dictated by her friend group. They called themselves the Core. There was Brittany, Brandon, Ivy, and the ringleader, Cole.
Friends.
They weren't just friends. They were a collective identity that operated with the efficiency of a military unit. If they weren't together physically, they were tethered by a group chat that pinged 300 times a day.
Think.
I moved into an apartment with Natalie in Riverside 7 months ago. We split everything rent, the utilities, the groceries right down the middle. I worked as a fire safety inspector,
Fingered.
a job that kept me grounded and gave me a stable life. I truly thought we were building towards something real. I saw marriage in our future, maybe even a house with a yard.
Yukin.
But I soon realized that while I was reading a book about building a life together, Natalie was living in a frantic, exhausting thriller produced by her friends. The Core had a schedule for everything. Monday was trivia night.
Picked.
Wednesday was indoor climbing, and Friday was reserved for movie marathons. If there was a gap in their calendar, they filled it with spontaneous outings.
Eve.
Natalie treated missing one of these events like a social death sentence. I watched her check her phone during her own uncle's funeral because Cole needed a consensus on some trivial drama. Cole was the worst of them all.
Fit.
He craved chaos, and he made sure that every disagreement in their social circle became a headline for the group chat. My breaking point wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, agonizing realization.
Our 2-year anniversary was scheduled for a Saturday.
I had been planning this for over a month. I made reservations at Marcello's, the place where Wed had our first date.
Fix.
I even scored tickets to a Radiohead concert because I knew how much she loved them. I didn't stop there. I bought her a vintage typewriter from an antique shop, a gift she had been hinting at for months.
Easin.
I told her about the plans 3 weeks in advance, hoping that by locking it in early, I could bypass the Core calendar. But that Thursday, I caught her scrolling through Instagram.
Faison. Watching her friends post stories from a brewery.
When I confirmed our plans, her face didn't light up. It dropped. She told me that Saturday was actually Ivy's pre-birthday celebration.
Use. If they could move it to Friday or Sunday.
She laughed, telling me it was the only night they could all be together. That was the moment the scale finally tipped for me. I looked at her, truly looked at her.
Friggaz, I was a placeholder in my own life.
She told me, love can wait, but friendship can't. Those words stung more than any breakup ever could. It wasn't the first time. 2 months ago.
Thingan.
At my sister's destination wedding in Santa Barbara, Natalie left me at the are metaphorically speaking, to attend a music festival with the group. She showed up to my sister's wedding for 90 minutes,
Fiction.
looking exhausted and disheveled, before disappearing back to her friends. When my father had a heart procedure and was in the hospital, Natalie wouldn't visit because it was Lord of the Rings movie night with the crew.
Freening.
She stayed home to watch a film rather than support me in a crisis. But when she needed a ride home from a club at 3 in the morning because Cole was too drunk to drive, she called me, and I was there within 20 minutes.
Means that.
I realized then that I wasn't her partner. I was a convenience. I heard her on the phone with Ivy the next day, calling me controlling because I wanted a night of our own.
Feed.
I had tried to talk to her about balance dozens of times, but she just turned it back on me, claiming I was isolating her. I was done begging for scraps of her time.
Finch.
I went to a coffee shop 4 blocks away and started looking for a 1-bedroom apartment. I found one within 15 minutes and submitted the application. When I got the approval 2 days later, I began my silent departure.
Eat.
I spent the next 10 days moving my things out, piece by piece, while she was busy with her mandatory social events. Tuesday, she was at dinner with Brittany. Wednesday, she was climbing with the group. Thursday,
She was at a rooftop bar with Cole.
she didn't even notice her home was becoming emptier. I left a note on the kitchen counter, right next to the empty spot where my coffee maker used to be. I didn't pack everything, though.
Eat.
I left the vintage typewriter I'd bought her. I left the Radiohead tickets, and I left the keys on the table. When she finally came home on Friday night to find an empty apartment, she didn't call me to ask why.
Things she called the group.
She thought she could summon the Corps to fix me, to bring me back into line. The doorbell rang at midnight, and there they were all, 4 of them standing on my new porch,
Ready for a confrontation.
ready to label me the bad guy.
But I didn't open the door.
I recorded them through the smart camera as they screamed, threatened to expose my controlling behavior on social media.
Made a scene for the entire neighborhood to see.
The next morning, I posted the footage online not as a victim, but as a person who had reclaimed his freedom. The internet doesn't like bullies,
Fushi.
and they certainly don't like people who value an Instagram group chat over the people who actually love them. By noon, the core was being roasted online. Their perfect curated lives were exposed as a hollow echo chamber.
V.
Natalie tried to call to apologize to tell me it was just a misunderstanding.
I didn't answer.
I blocked them all. For the first time in 2 years, I woke up on a Sunday morning to silence. No pings, no frantic demands,
Schedule to follow.
just me, a quiet apartment, and the realization that the best way to win a game where the rules are rigged is simply to stop playing. I finally feel stable. I finally feel like myself again.
The best part.
I didn't have to change who I was. I just had to leave the people who didn't know how to value me. This is a complete, dramatized script written in the style of high-engagement YouTube storytelling channels.
You.
The script is structured for a narrator with pacing, emotional beats, and clear pauses. They say that love is supposed to be a partnership, a space where 2 people build a world of their own.
Vent.
But what happens when you realize you're not building a home, but merely renting space in someone else's social calendar? My name is Owen, and for 2 long, exhausting years, I was the Plusone in my own relationship.
Fiend it.
I didn't just break up with a girl. I broke up with an entire ecosystem that didn't know I existed until I threatened to leave. Everything started with a schedule. Tuesday was dinner with Brittany, her best friend.
Vim.
Wednesday was mandatory rock climbing with the group. Thursday, that was reserved for whatever trendy rooftop bar Cole wanted to hit. Friday was movie night, Saturday was brunch and shopping, and somewhere in that whirlwind,
I was expected to just exist.
change tone, deeper, more determined. I realized the end was coming when I started my exit plan. I didn't do it in a blaze of glory or a shouting match. I started small. Clothes, books.
Vex supply us things.
She wouldn't notice immediately. Natalie was, by nature, a hurricane of chaos. She left her belongings everywhere, and honestly, she barely looked at what was mine versus hers.
He never once checked us out of the closet.
By day 6, nearly half my life was packed into boxes, smuggled out of the apartment under the guise of spring cleaning or donations. My new place was finally taking shape,
Feeling like a sanctuary.
while our old apartment just looked slightly less cluttered. Friday night, around 1 a.m., I was packing the last of my gaming setup when I heard the jingle of her keys. He had texted an hour earlier saying they were wrapping up, but in Natalie's world, that usually meant another 3 hours. I froze. The footsteps stopped in the living room. Then, the confusion hit. Owen?
The coffee table book. Where is everything?
Her voice climbed an octave with every room she entered. Kitchen, bathroom, home office. She found me standing in the center of our bedroom.
Surrounded by bare shelves.
Her eyes scanned the roomy closet, completely empty. The nightstand, stripped of my lamp and my watch. Are you moving out? I didn't yell. I didn't argue.
Thing.
I simply handed her a letter I had written.
Stop.
2 pages. every word calculated, every frustration laid bare. I told her I needed someone who actually prioritized our relationship.
Found
I explained that I was tired of being the permanent afterthought. I told her I had spent 2 years hoping she would finally notice what I needed, but it was clear that she either couldn't or wouldn't. She read it once, fast.
He read it again, slower.
When she looked up, her expression wasn't one of sadness. It was pure, unadulterated shock. You're seriously leaving me because I have friends? Because I want to abandon the people I love?
It's not about having friends.
Natalie, I said, my voice steady. Then what is it? She demanded, waving the letter like it was a court summons. This reads like, you're forcing me to choose. I just want you to care about me too, I replied. I want to feel like I actually matter in this relationship. She stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Of course you matter, Owen, but I can't ditch everyone every time you want attention.
Picked that word.
To her, wanting to spend our anniversary together a night I had planned 3 weeks in advance was me being needy. I reminded her of that night. I explained why that specific date was significant to me,
Huge.
and why it was far more important than a group outing with people I barely knew. She threw her hands up in the air, a familiar gesture of dismissive exhaustion. This is ridiculous.
Throwing away 2 years. Just because you can't handle me having a life?
You knew who I was when you met me. I looked at her, and that was the moment the veil lifted. I realized she genuinely believed it. In her mind,
She was the victim.
and I was the problem. I thought I knew who you were, I said quietly. I thought you wanted to build something with me. I do. I just don't want to cut everyone off to do it.
Nobody is asking you to cut them off, Natalie.
I'm just asking you to make some space for me. She was already shaking her head. We circled that same drain for 20 minutes. Same arguments. Same scripts.
He saw me as controlling.
I saw it as the bare minimum of human decency. There was no middle ground. Finally, I held up my hands. Am done arguing, or done with us? Both, that hit her differently.
Frightened.
Her posture slumped, then suddenly shifted into desperation. She started listing memories, trying to anchor me to the past. Remember that concert? We ran into Brittany and Brandon.
Dinner we cooked for the core group.
It was a wake-up call. Every single memory she had of us involved everyone else. I told her I'd come back for the final boxes while she was at Ivy's pool party on Sunday.
Right.
I set my key on the counter, walked out, and didn't look back Saturday morning. I was in my new place, finally feeling like I could breathe. Then my phone exploded. Natalie. Call after call. When I didn't answer,
Text started.
long, rambling paragraphs about talking like adults, how I was being immature, how relationships require communication. I ignored it all. I figured shed, eventually move on to the next drama.
Finged.
I was wrong. By noon, the core started messaging me individually. Brittany sent a manifesto about how devastated Natalie was. She used all the buzzwords: boundaries, emotional labor, toxic masculinity. It was ironic.
Yunja.
Coming from someone whose last 3 relationships ended in flames because she couldn't stop interfering. Cole called me selfish for ghosting instead of sitting down for a group intervention.
Big.
Brandon tried the reasonable approach, suggesting we all meet up to discuss the relationship properly. Even Evia Woman ID, spoken to maybe 8 times in 2 years, sent me a voice note. He just sighed into the microphone and whispered, "Energy doesn't lie. I'm sending you light." It was cult-like. By Sunday, the narrative had shifted. I wasn't a boyfriend leaving a relationship anymore.
Vaden.
I was an emotionally abusive monster who had abandoned her without warning, despite the tupage letter sitting on her kitchen counter. Monday evening, I pulled into my parking lot at 7 p.m. I stepped out of my car.
Fun Street. And my heart sank.
They were there, all 5 of them, standing in front of my building entrance like a firing squad. Natalie stood at the front, with the others lined up behind her like backup dancers.
She started talking before I even got within 10 feet of the door.
"We need to settle this, Owen. You don't just get to disappear." Her voice echoed off the pavement, loud enough for the entire block to hear. I stopped.
You.
I looked at them, then back at her. There is nothing to settle, Natalie. I made my decision, I explained my reasons. I'm leaving. I reached for the door handle. You can't just walk away from 2 years, like it meant nothing,
She screamed.
her voice shaking.
That's not fair.
I turned back, my eyes locking with hers. Fair was our anniversary, Natalie. Fair was my sister's wedding, that you missed because of a brunch.
Fair was my dad being in the hospital.
When you said you couldn't make it because you had a commitment with the group. I took a step toward them. I chose myself. That's what's unfair to you. Brandon stepped forward, posturing.
You're being selfish.
Do you know how much you're hurting her? Hurting all of us. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. What exactly did I do to hurt people? I barely know. It was the most codependent thing I had ever witnessed. Apparently, dating Natalie meant I was indentured to her entire social circle. Brittany was still preaching about safe spaces. Cole was fishing for details, his eyes wide, clearly savoring the drama. Natalie just stood there, nodding, as if this public ambush were a perfectly normal Tuesday. You have 30 seconds to leave, I said, my voice devoid of emotion.
Before I call security.
They didn't move. I pulled out my phone and dialed, just like I promised. When the guard arrived, they tried to argue, claiming I was the one being aggressive. But eventually, they backed off.
Fix.
As they walked away, Natalie shouted back that this wasn't over. That was a month ago. The calls and texts finally stopped after 2 weeks. I still get the occasional message from a random number, testing the waters to see if I've come to my senses. But they don't understand the truth. I didn't lose a relationship. I lost a cage, and for the first time in 2 years, blissfully alone.
Fijian.
I walked out of that apartment for the very last time, the heavy metal door clicking shut behind me, and I knew he was finally breathing again. It had been a month since the screaming matches and the threats that this wasn't over.
Findom.
My phone had finally gone quiet after 2 weeks of nonstop harassment, but the shadows were still there. I still get those random numbers pinging my lock screen at 3 a.m. Silent calls that make my stomach knot up.
They haven't shown their faces at my job or my home.
But the threat of them lurking around every corner is a weight. I can't shake. I don't regret leaving for even a single second, but I never expected the sheer,
Function.
calculated aggression of it all. In the weeks following our confrontation, things stopped being random outbursts and started becoming a coordinated military operation. Owen, a guy I train with at the gym,
Thinked.
pulled me aside one afternoon, his expression grim. He told me Brandon Natalie's new ally had been cornering people in the locker room, whispering that Itty systematically isolated Natalie from everyone who loved her.
Fict.
I had severe anger issues, that I was a control freak, that I was dangerous. It was the classic smear campaigno, concrete facts, just vague.
Thin.
Chilling implications designed to make people fear me without ever saying anything that could be disproven in a court of law. Then, the social media storm hit. Ivy, one of her closest friends,
Bien.
started flooding her feed with photos of her, and Natalie looking pained and fragile. Dot captioned with phrases like, "In my healing era, and when people show you who they are, believe them." She never uttered my name.
He painted a picture so
So specific that everyone in our social circle knew exactly who the villain was supposed to be. Brittany joined in, posting long Instagram threads about identifying the signs of a coercive partner.
he started general.
Then zeroed in on me, writing, "If your partner gets upset when you spend time with your friends, that isn't love, that's control." She tagged Natalie in every single post, and just like that,
Were connected for anyone who had been paying attention.
Cole acted as the whisper network, reaching out to our mutual friends one by one. He wouldn't just accuse me. He'd act like he was deeply concerned, saying,
You know, Natalie is just so shaken up,
the way he left was so aggressive. He'd become so demanding toward the end. It was a web of absolute lies, delivered with the tone of a worried friend. I didn't reach out.
Fend myself. I just started saving everything.
Every screenshot, every timestamp, every third-hand rumor that made its way back to my ears. I built a massive digital file, organized by date, person,
And the specific nature of the lie.
I made notice this is provably false. This is a subjective opinion. This is a targeted attack. Owen kept pushing me to speak up to go public and clear my name, but I shook my head.
Him to wait.
Because reacting too early is exactly what they wanted. I needed them to overplay their hand until they made a mistake I could actually hold them to. And then, 3 weeks after I moved out, they finally broke.
Finishing up.
I was finishing up a restaurant inspection downtown when my phone buzzed with a fraud alert from my bank. 8:47. It was my credit card. The one it left with Natalie, back when we were together for Absolute.
Emergencies.
I had honestly forgotten. She even had the physical card in her possession. I pulled up the transaction history, and my blood went cold.
Yumabet.
The charge happened the previous Friday night at an expensive Italian bistro near the waterfront. It was the exact same night that Natalie's support crew had posted photos of their support Natalie dinner. A group of 5 of them lounging in a high-end spot with exposed brick walls and overpriced pasta. I didn't call Natalie, I called the restaurant. I asked to speak to the manager, explained. I was disputing a charge.
And he confirmed everything. A party of 5.
Booked under Natalie's name. Multiple bottles of wine, appetizers, 3-course meals, and cocktails. The total bill was just over $700, and Shed added a 20 tip,
Yulin.
bringing it to exactly $847. She had used my money to fund a celebration where they were almost certainly sitting there, dissecting my character and laughing about how they'd won. I didn't hesitate. I called my bank, flagged the transaction as unauthorized, explained that the card was meant for emergencies only, and that the owner of the card had been separated from me for weeks. They froze the card immediately, launched an investigation,
From Shin.
and issued me a new number. Then I sent Natalie one single final text. Using my credit card without permission is legally considered fraud. The amount has been disputed and reported.
Further contact must go through official
Legal channels. I hit send and blocked her number before the message even registered as delivered. The backlash was instant. Brittany posted within hours a long,
self-righteous rant
about how financial abuse doesn't end when the relationship does. She called me a monster, claiming that cutting off someone's access to resources was a textbook act of a controlling abuser.
Present.
The comment section was a disaster, filled with people it never met calling me manipulative, saying I was just proving their point. But I had the receipts. I had bank statements from when the card was opened.
Explicitly.
For emergencies, I had text messages where she and I had discussed those rules, where she'd agreed to them.
Transaction history.
Showing Shed used it exactly once in our entire relationship for a car, told that I had explicitly authorized. I didn't post a word. I just added Brittany's post to the file.
Fact.
But the situation escalated again. A week later, I went back to the old apartment to clear out my final boxes as I'd taken over the lease to ensure a clean break.
View.
The landlord was there for a walkthrough, and Natalie offhandedly had been by the day before. He said Shed taken some mail, and he thought it was strange since Shed moved out and wasn't on the lease anymore.
Part sank.
As I checked the pile lid left on the kitchen counter. My DMV renewal, my credit card statement, and confidential documents regarding my work benefits, all gone. Not junk mail. Not the stuff you throw away.
She had stolen my private, identifying information.
That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a bitter breakup anymore. It was a war, and I was finally ready to fight back. I called the police. Opened a formal report for identity theft and mailed tail tampering. And provided the officer with the neatly organized file ID been building for weeks.
Dinged.
The look on the officer's face when he saw the time-stamped evidence of the fraud combined with the stolen mail told me everything I needed to know. Justice doesn't always come with a shout sometimes.
Thanked.
It comes with a pair of handcuffs and a very stern warning. When the police showed up at the address listed for Natalie, they didn't just find the mail. Found a trail of evidence that shattered the entire victim narrative she had spent months building. The landlord testified, the bank provided the logs, and the lies began to crumble under the weight of the truth.
Faked.
I didn't have to say a word to anyone. The truth did the work for me, and for the first time in months, I felt truly completely free. It started with a piece of mail, not a bill, not a circular,
E.T.
but my personal banking documents gone from my own mailbox. When I realized who had taken them, my stomach dropped. She wasn't just my ex-girlfriend anymore. She was a stranger with a key to my sanctuary.
Weaponizing my privacy to force a reaction.
Little did she know I wasn't playing the victim. I was building a paper trail, and I was just getting started. I didn't scream. I didn't call her. Instead,
The landlord.
I laid out the facts. Unauthorized entry, theft of federal mail, and a broken lease agreement. He acted instantly. By that afternoon, the locks were changed and I was holding the only key.
Fan.
I sent Natalie a final formal email. Any further attempt to enter my home would be treated as trespassing. Cole, ever the loyal sidekick, tried to spin the narrative on social media. He posted a vague,
View note.
melodramatic rant about illegal lockouts and toxic retaliation. He conveniently left out that Natalie's lease was void, that Shed already cleared her things, and most importantly, that Shed been stealing my mail.
To the outside world. I was the villain.
The petty ex-boyfriend. But inside our friend group, the cracks were starting to show. Howen noticed it first at the gym. Brandon, usually the lead orchestrator of our group's chaos,
He was changing.
he was showing up with Emma, leaving early, and actually looking happy. Emma had set boundaries early on. She wasn't interested in being part of a hive mind. He expected Brandon to prioritize their life together over the group's constant.
Exhausting drama.
And here was the kicker: Brandon was actually doing it. He was pulling back, missing the group chats,
Vimid.
and choosing a quiet dinner over the constant performative drama of the inner circle. Natalie confronted him at the gym, her voice sharp with desperation. She demanded to know why he was turning into Devin, why he was choosing Emma over the family. Brandon looked her dead in the eye and told her the truth. She needed to grow up. That was the first real fracture in their foundation. Then,
Read a promotion and moved to Seattle.
Ivy and Cole officially went public. With every change, Natalie spiraled, trying to patch the holes in her ego with guilt and manipulation. I knew they weren't finished.
People like Natalie
Don't just disappear, they escalate until they get the grand finale they've scripted in their heads. 6 Dex walks after I moved out. It happened. I was supposed to meet Owen at Groundwork Coffee for lunch.
Figgins.
When I walked in, Owen was nowhere to be found, but the corner table was occupied by a familiar, hostile lineup. Natalie, Brittany, Brandon, and Ivy. It was a setup. Owen's "I'm running late" text was a calculated decoy.
Fandon.
Stood up, feigning a diplomatic tone. Devin, man, let's just talk for a minute. I looked at the table. Adults don't bring a camera crew to a conversation. Brittany stepped forward,
Her expression practiced.
and sympathetic. We aren't here to attack you, Devin. We just think you owe Natalie some closure. I didn't even break stride. Closure isn't a service I provide, I said, my voice steady.
Vend.
That's when I noticed Ivy. She was holding her phone at waist level, the lens pointed right at me. She wasn't trying to hide it. She wanted the clip. She wanted the cold, heartless villain footage.
Fingsin.
I looked directly at the lens and gave her a faint smile. Make sure you get my good side if you're going to lie about me. Her grip faltered. The script was failing. I walked to the counter, paid for my coffee,
Vind.
and ignored the weeping and the loud accusations of unhealthy patterns erupting from their table. I walked out, leaving them to their own theater. A week later, the video appeared on Instagram, 15 seconds of me walking away, edited to make me look like a monster. The caption read, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them." The comments were vicious, but they didn't know the truth.
I had the receipts.
I had the timeline.
And most importantly,
I knew that every desperate move they made was just another piece of evidence for the inevitable day, when their entire curated image would collapse. I took a screenshot of the post.
I added it to the file.
They thought they were winning the war of public opinion, but they were actually building the very case that would eventually expose every lie they'd ever told. I didn't need to fight them.
I just needed to let them keep talking.
Justice. Isn't a performance, it's a process. And mine was almost complete. The comment section was a battlefield. People were calling me cold, heartless, even abusive.
Full picture.
Up. They didn't see the calculated ambush at the coffee shop or the way Brittany had coached Natalie to manipulate every single interaction.
You
I had screenshotted everything before they could delete their digital footprint. I kept a digital vault, a file of every lie, every scripted argument, and every staged confrontation. Then, out of the blue,
views on.
a DM landed in my inbox. The profile belonged to a guy named Jeremy Martinez. He was a mutual friend of Brittany's, but his message cut straight to the point in Brittany's ex.
I heard.
You're dealing with her little crew and their manufactured drama. I have files that might interest you. I was skeptical, but the curiosity was a sharp itch I couldn't ignore. I asked for proof. He delivered. He sent us screenshots from a group chat featuring Brittany, Ivy, and Natalie, dated days before the coffee shop incident. Brittany's text read, "We need to corner him in a public space so he can't just walk away.
Coffee shop near his office is perfect.
If he's meeting Owen there, that's even better. It'll make the optics perfect," Ivy replied. "He'll record the entire thing. We need the world to see how cold he is when Natalie confronts him." Natalie asked, "What if he just walks out?" Brittany's response was chilling. "Then we have that on camera too. Either way, we win." My stomach churned. Then, another screenshot surfaced.
This one was about my own credit card.
Brittany was pushing Natalie to use it for a dinner, calling it emotional damages for what I had supposedly done to her. Natalie had hesitated, clearly uncomfortable.
Asking if it was wrong.
Brittany didn't care. He abandoned you. He doesn't get to play the victim. Use the card. It was predatory. But the most damning evidence was the voice notes.
Brittany
Was literally feeding Natalie lines, coaching her on how to sound hurt, how to sound like a victim, and exactly when to pivot the conversation to make me look like the aggressor. Jeremy sent one final message that hit home. She did the exact same thing to me 2 years ago. She painted me as a controlling monster because I wanted some boundaries.
faved everything.
Because I knew she'd do it again to someone else. I thanked him, my hands shaking. He told me he'd be willing to go on the record whenever I was ready. He mentioned that Cole had been dumbing people.
Telling them.
I had threatened Natalie, which was a dangerous lie. I had the ammunition. I had the truth. But I realized that dropping it right then would be a waste. I needed to wait for them to overplay their hand.
Fight.
The opportunity arrived 2 months later at an engagement party for our friends, Chris and Amanda, held at a venue called The Foundry. It was an elegant spot with exposed brick and shimmering string lights.
Filled with about 80 people.
Amanda, being the sharp person she is, had already told Chris, "If Natalie shows up and tries to stage a scene, I am personally throwing her out." I arrived with Zoe.
The woman I had been seeing for a few months.
Zoe was an architect, calm, confident, and completely unimpressed by the drama that had consumed my life. I had been upfront with her about the entire ordeal.
Feigned. She had simply shrugged.
"If they act up, we leave," she had said. "Otherwise, I'm not scared of your ex and her fan club." When we walked into the Foundry, the atmosphere was electric. Music hummed in the background.
Phone bar was buzzing.
I saw Owen almost immediately near the bar. He leaned in, his voice low. "The whole crew is here. Back corner near the exit. Natalie is wearing a white dress, of all things."
She looks like Shez trying to upstage the bride.
I glanced over. There they were, Brittany, Ivy, Natalie, and the rest of the gang, posted up like they owned the room. Zoe took my hand, her grip steady and reassuring.
You ready?
She asked. "Always," I replied. We walked toward the center of the room, ready to enjoy the night, fully aware that the trap was set, but this time I knew exactly how to dismantle it. Scene start, hook,
Fist.
The air in the room was thick, heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and the suffocating tension of a trap being sprung. I stood there, a glass in my hand, watching the predator stalk toward me under the strobe lights.
View.
Most people think a breakup is just two hearts breaking, but sometimes it's a calculated, weaponized war zone. Tonight, the mask finally fell off, and everyone in the room saw exactly who the monster was. The setup. The venue was buzzing with laughter and the clinking of glasses. It was Chris and Amanda's engagement party, a night meant for joy, not for ghosts from my past. Zoe stood by my side, her presence a quiet, stable anchor. She handed me a gin and tonic, her eyes scanning the crowd with a calm, analytical focus. Devin, Amanda whispered, pulling me into a quiet corner near the bar. If Natalie tries anything, do not take the bait, she warned.
Fierce.
Just let me handle it. I won't let them ruin our night. I nodded, grateful, though a cold knot of dread had already tightened in my stomach. For the first hour, it was perfect. We danced.
We laughed with Owen, and we celebrated.
But then, the atmosphere shifted, turning from champagne gold to an icy, aggressive blue, the confrontation. At 9:30, the shift happened.
Buvage.
Natalie rose from her table like a queen bee leading her hive. Brittany and Ivy flanked her, their phones already raised, their cameras blinking like hungry, unblinking eyes. Cole was right behind them, face illuminated by the harsh glow of a live-streaming ring light. They moved as a coordinated unit, a phalanx of chaos closing in on us. Devin. Natalie's voice pierced the music, sharp and demanding. We need to talk.
Right now.
Everyone needs to hear this. The music didn't stop, but the energy in the room vacuumed out, leaving a hollow silence as heads turned. I didn't flinch. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my drink, staring back at the woman who had spent months trying to systematically dismantle my life. No, we don't, I said, my voice steady, echoing against the sudden quiet. You owe me an explanation, she shrieked.
Thing.
Her composure cracking as she realized I wasn't intimidated. You don't get to just walk away and act like I'm nothing. The twist, the reveal.
Needn't move.
She just looked at Natalie with a pity that was far more painful than anger. This isn't a conversation, Zoe said, her voice cool and clinical. It's a performance. Natalie's face flushed a deep, ugly crimson.
You don't know what he's capable of,
she shouted, trying to rile up the growing crowd of onlookers. I stepped forward, no longer the man she had manipulated. Do you want to tell them, Natalie? I asked,
looking her dead in the eye.
Do you want to tell them about our anniversary? Or the thousands you drained from my credit card while I was dealing with my father's surgery? The room gasped.
Friend.
Tell them about the scripts your friends wrote for you, I continued, my voice gaining strength. Tell them how you practiced this moment, like it was a scene in a bad movie. The high point. Cole was still broadcasting.
Phew.
His eyes wide with the thrill of the content he thought he was capturing. Yo, this is crazy, he yelled into his phone. Devin's getting called out for being a dead beat. Suddenly, gentlemen standing nearby pushed past them, furious. Are you seriously live streaming at a private engagement party? He barked. Have you no shame? Amanda appeared then, stepping between us, her face like carved ice.
Phew.
She looked at Natalie and her toxic crew with pure, unadulterated disdain. This is my night, Amanda said, her voice booming over the music, and you are not invited. You are leaving, all of you, right now. Brittany,
still filming,
tried to play the martyr. This is what it looks like when an abuser gets protected, she shouted to her internet audience. Amanda didn't blink. She pointed a finger at the phone. Put that away.
Security will take it from you permanently. The climax, justice.
Security grabbed them then, ushering them toward the exit. Natalie stopped one last time, turning back to me, her voice shrill and desperate, vibrating with a level of entitlement that left the whole room baffled. You are not allowed to move on before I give you permission, she screamed. Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Then, someone in the back started to laugh. It started as a trickle and grew into a roar of collective disbelief. The absurdity of her statement had stripped away her power. They were escorted out into the cold, leaving behind nothing but the echoes of their own embarrassment, the aftermath. By Sunday morning, the final blow was dealt. My phone was vibrating incessantly with notifications. Someone had leaked the entire truth. A thread had appeared online, filled with the screenshots of their private group chat. It was all Thareth planning of the ambush, the proof of the financial theft, and the voice notes of Brittany coaching Natalie on how to lie.
Finkton.
The clips of Cole's live stream were contrasted with the edited videos they had tried to use to frame me weeks earlier. The public perception shifted in an instant.
Figston.
It wasn't a story about a breakup anymore. It was an expose on a group of people who couldn't handle that they no longer controlled the narrative. I wasn't the victim they tried to make me out to be.
You.
I was the man who had finally chosen himself. And as I scrolled through the comments, seeing the tide turn, I felt a heavy weight finally lift from my chest. The truth had arrived, and for the first time in years,
Felt clean. Scene end.
this isn't just a story about a breakup. It is a cold, hard look at a social circle that believed they owned the narrative of everyone around them.
Thing.
The problem wasn't that Devin left the problem, was that he dared to prioritize his own sanity over their toxic ecosystem. And because he refused to play their game, they tried to dismantle his reputation in real time.
Fenton.
The comment sections became a battlefield of truth, with strangers calling out the blatant entitlement of this group. People were laughing at the absurdity of the no permission to move on mentality, turning it into viral memes.
You.
It was clear to everyone watching that this group was weaponizing therapy speak to manipulate others into submission. Bringing 5 people with cameras to a private engagement party wasn't just rude, it was absolutely unhinged.
Thin.
My phone started vibrating incessantly. Ozan was on the other end, his voice tight. Are you seeing this online? Yeah, I see it. But I didn't post any of that footage, I replied. I know, Al said.
Deal.
Jeremy was the one who uploaded the stream, and watching Cole broadcast that private moment just pushed me over the edge. Moments later, Zoe called. Hey, are you doing okay? I'm holding up, I told her.
Finked.
I never wanted this to be public, but I'm not going to sit here and be angry that they turned it into a circus. They chose to film it and broadcast it, I continued. So now they have to live with the consequences. By Monday,
Fix.
the entire social scene was buzzing with the fallout. Brandon finally broke his silence, posting a lengthy apology.
Fix it.
He admitted he had been wrong to facilitate their behavior and declared he was stepping away from the core group forever. He specifically called out Brittany and Ivy for the predatory way they had organized the ambush.
Beamble.
Brittany immediately went private and scrubbed her account clean, choosing total radio silence. Ivy, however, tried to spin the narrative, claiming everything was taken out of context. The internet responded by destroying her.
Fiengen.
Commenters began stitching her edited clips side by side with the raw, full-length footage. Her brand built on a foundation of fake authenticity shattered overnight. Cole, meanwhile, was getting roasted for the live stream,
Fingen.
with comments labeling him as the least self-aware person on the planet, clearly desperate for any shred of relevance. Natalie, for her part, went completely dark. A full week later,
Fent.
Chris and Amanda sent out a firm message to our mutual friends. The core group was officially banned from future events, not because of the argument.
You because.
The sanctity of someone else's engagement for content. 2 weeks after that, Brandon had severed every remaining tie. Emma had laid down an ultimatum, and he chose their future over the chaos.
Figs.
Brittany packed her bags and moved to Seattle, burning every bridge she had left in town. Ivy and Cole's relationship imploded under the weight of the scrutiny. Once the drama dried up, they realized they had absolutely nothing in common to hold them together. The core was finished. A week after the receipts were released, a notification popped up on my phone. It was an email with the subject line,
Cease and desist.
regarding defamatory statements. It was a formal letter drafted by the attorney I had hired. It had been sent to Natalie, Brittany, and Cole. The language was cold, professional,
Fighted every single
false claim they had peddled online. It demanded they halt all contact and scrub the defamatory content immediately. It wasn't just a threat of a lawsuit, it was a boundary with teeth.
fuel.
It cost me $400, and it was the best investment I ever made. The harassment stopped instantly. 3 months later, I was in the produce aisle of the local grocery store. I turned the corner, and there she was, Natalie. She was alone, and she looked exhausted. We locked eyes, and she didn't look away. She walked toward me, hesitant. Can we talk for a minute? She asked. Keep it quick, I replied. I just wanted to say that I finally get it, she said quietly. I see what you and Zoe have, and I see what Brandon and Emma have, and I realize I never gave you that piece. Sorry, she added.
I appreciate you saying that,
I told her. But I was wrong to stay as long as I did about all of it. You look happy, she remarked, her voice trembling. I am, I said. Zoe and I are doing incredibly well. Face did this sad, hollow thing, a realization of everything she'd pushed away. That's good, she whispered. You deserve that, and I hope you find it. I grabbed my cart and walked away without looking back.
When I got home, I told Zoe the whole story.
She asked me how I felt in that moment. Fine, I said. It's finally done, and it really was.
Indo Bill.
Natalie apologized because the collapse of her group forced her to finally face her own reflection. But it was too little, too late. 6 months later, I heard she was dating someone new and actually trying to balance her life.
For her.
Brittany stayed in Seattle, finding a new rhythm. Ivy spent a long time rebuilding, dropping the performative lifestyle entirely. Cole tried to keep the drama alive.
People just stopped engaging with his content.
Brandon and Emma got married in a small, quiet ceremony. Owen told me later that it was the most peaceful event he'd ever attended. As for me and Zoe, we're rock solid.
You got a dog.
And we're currently planning a trip to Japan. We're living like adults who choose each other with intention every single day. Sometimes, I think back on those 2 years.
Second.
I remember being told that love could wait, being forced to cancel my sister's wedding and skip my dad's hospital visits for a pre-game session. I remember being told I wasn't allowed to move on until someone else felt better.
Feud.
And I remember the moment I walked away, despite every ounce of pressure telling me to stay. It was the best decision I ever made. Sometimes, choosing yourself is the only real choice there is. Guys,
We are so incredibly close.
to reaching 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, please consider doing so. It really helps us reach that milestone.
Thank you.
For making this dream a reality.